Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I am honored to have Thomas Williams with me. And just to give a little intro on Thomas, so Thomas is a retired NFL player. He is an author, and his book is called Permission to Dream, and we're going to talk about that. And he's also a keynote public speaker. He's got a few different nicknames. One of them, professional reminder, and a phrase that he has used, and I think he's talked about it in the sports world because that's what he comes from. But I think as we listen today, it'll carry over to everyone. And it's athletes are great people first who just so happen to be great athletes. Greatness may have started with sports, but it doesn't end when you retire. Greatness is a lifestyle. So, Thomas, thanks so much for being on, my man.
Appreciate it, Phil. Thank you so much, man. I'm honored. I'm excited to dive in and have this conversation.
Yes, sir. So, the younger years for you, talked about was, growing up, folks got divorced when you were young and you moved out to California. So talk a little bit about, those early years and, moving away from what was home and also adapting to, kind of a one parent household.
Yeah, early on, seeing, those specifics as far as having parents who are divorced, it was extremely difficult and challenging. Then you tie in the fact that I'm biracial. So I literally grew up with only one half of me. And so from the parent standpoint, and then honestly from the biological standpoint, like, so being half black, half white, grew up in a predominantly white community. I'm biracial. So I grew up just like with a lot of anger and frustration issues. And I think that those issues really stem from a lot of uncertainty. Here I am seeing my friends, they got both parents at home. And, I go home to just my mom, my grandma,
Mm,
and my stepdad. And so it was a phenomenal childhood because I had a mom who fought for me, who loved me, who fought me,
yeah.
with all the times that I got in trouble. And then I had a stepdad who taught me one of the greatest lessons, most valuable things that you could ever teach a child is that it doesn't matter if you are mine or aren't, I'm going to love you regardless.
Mm,
And that was one of the most, iconic instances that I ever experienced when it comes to unconditional love. And his name's Ron. I don't want to just say the guy.
yeah.
And my mom and Ron actually, they split up when I was a little bit younger, probably like going into high school. But we still keep in contact to this day,
Cool.
and it's for that reason. He was the guy who taught me how to throw a curveball. After
Yeah.
work, he would come home and play catch. And Phil, honestly, what I learned from Ron is that the most effective way to parent, coach, counsel, or lead is to listen. And
Mm,
Ron always listened to me.
yeah.
And so, when I learned that aspect, Ron was somebody who I can trust. And so Ron taught me how to play sports. And so that was like my safe haven. I got in trouble at school, but I never got in trouble at recess, other than I was a guy who constantly tackled people. But I loved to play sports, whether it was tetherball, being competitive in foursquare, basketball. And I was terrible at basketball, but I just love to compete and love to play. And so growing up in Vacaville, I thought I was going to be a professional baseball player, where I moved on and fell in love with the game of football. And early on in my athletic career, I knew I wanted to play professional sports. I just didn't know it would be in a completely different field than the one that I loved. And so played freshman football. And about or right before our last game, my freshman football year, one of our coaches walked over to me in the stretch line and said, "Welcome to varsity." And I was like, "What do you mean, welcome to varsity? I got to go to JV." He goes,
Yeah.
"You? Nah, you're not going to JV." And so I just remember feeling like I was chosen again, like somebody picked me. And to
Mm.
be honest, I didn't even know what I was doing on the football field. It was like, go run in that direction, hit that person as hard as you can, and tackle. And so it was the first time that I had ever experienced people praising me for being aggressive and physical, as
Yeah.
opposed to kicking me out, getting suspended, getting sent home, all of those other things of that nature. And so, yeah, man, I found my love for football, still continue to play baseball, but that was my one true love. And so, one of the things that I love sharing with people, especially with parents who are trying to individualize or specialize their kids in sports,
Yeah.
is play whatever's on TV.
Mm,
If baseball's on TV, play baseball. And then when it's time to play football, basketball, and whatever other sports are, because
yeah.
individualizing sports is, increased chance for burnout. And I don't know
Hmm.
too many people who said I played football from the time I was 7 till the time I was 27, 37.
Yeah.
They usually get burnt out right around that high school, college time. And so if you're looking to have longevity in it, play as much and as often as you can.
I love it. So talking a little bit about that, played freshman, and then I mean the next 3 years of football for you in high school are, I mean, a quick rise. I mean,
Yeah.
you're one of the top players in the country by senior year, and yet we'll get to where you end up deciding to go. But talk about that progression going from freshman football to varsity as a sophomore, and then I mean transcending and becoming one of the best in the state.
Yeah, so one of the things that I teach on now and being a member of the Jon Gordon Speaking team on Power Positive Leadership and Power Positive Team, we talk about leadership as a transfer of belief. And Phil, the reason why I want to mention this is because I learned at 15 years old what borrowed belief is. And so I was the scaredy cat kid who played football. So I was big for my size, but I was always scared. So every single game I'd walk up to one of my trusted friends and I would ask, like, do you think we're going to win tonight? And we had this coach by the name of Coach Green, Steve Green. And Steve Green was the largest human being. And I'm not exaggerating, 6'6", like 450 pounds. And
Big
so
man.
the man who could yell at you and never cussed at
Yeah.
all. But you almost felt like he was doing you a little bit dirtier because he had such a wide vocabulary where he didn't need to cuss.
Yeah.
And so on this night, he overheard me and he came over to me. He said, Thomas, do you think we're going to win? I said, I don't know, coach. He said, well, I know we're going to win. And I have so much belief in us. If you need some of it, just borrow some of mine because I got a lot.
Mm,
And in that moment, I really understood what like real leadership was, especially when you're pouring into the people who are on your team or the followers. And so, and that night, Coach Green believed in us and me in particular so much that I went out and had the game of my like sophomore season. And from then on out, I went to Coach Green every single time. And I was like, Coach, you think we're going to win tonight? And he's like, no matter how much belief you have, if you don't have enough, just ride on the back of mine. And so
yeah.
we um we had a pretty good decent team, but what started to happen, Phil, is I started to find myself in this thing which they call of obsessive compulsive disorder. And I use that term funny and loosely because on the weekends I didn't have a father to hang out with, right? Like my
Yeah.
dad lived across the country. And so we didn't come from a lot of money, and so it wasn't like we were going to ball games. It wasn't like we were going and doing all these activities that you would like to do on the weekends with your
Yeah.
family. And so I had a gym membership. And so what I found out early on is that the gym opens very early and closes very late. You can go as long as you want, as long as you have a membership. And so I found myself sometimes going 2 and 3 times a day,
Yeah.
and just so that I wouldn't have to sit in the sorrow sometimes of the things that I didn't want to necessarily constantly think about,
Mm,
because it could make somebody who would be depressed. And
yeah.
so I would go work out and then I would exhaust myself so that when I got home, I would be too tired to think about, any type of dysfunction, any disappointment, and anything like in my family dynamics or even in school or life. And so in my junior year, I created this imaginary person. And this imaginary person, I'm not crazy. I should say this. They haven't clinically diagnosed me as being crazy. I've done some crazy things, but I created in my sophomore year this person that was an alter ego that was always better than me. And it was
Mm,
like, I'm an only child. And I tell people that all the time. I'm an only child, but I'm my mom's favorite. So,
yeah.
when I created this person, it was the older brother that was way better than me, faster than me,
Mm,
stronger than me, smarter than me, did everything much easier than I could. And what I did is that in my mind, when I would start to compare myself to other players or say somebody's working out or I'm tired, that older, better, best version of me, of a brother, of a sibling, came by and would say, hey, I'm going for a run. Do you want to go? And so we would go to the school, we would go to the hills and we'd run sprints. And I'd get to 10, that number that I said, I'm going to do 3 sets of 10. And then all of a sudden he would come by and say, I'm going to do 11. And I'm like,
mm,
oh my gosh, I got to do 11. And so whether it was working out, whether it was running, and then it even carried over into studying that, oh,
yeah.
people are going out. He's like, oh, I'm not going to go out. I got to study for finals next week. And so he was the best thing that ever didn't happen to me,
Yeah.
if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because he was the person who pushed me beyond and gave me my competitive edge and my competitive advantage. And so, you know, a lot of times people just think when I talk about athletics or when I talk about academics, they're like, oh, it just sounds like it was so easy for you. The reason why that alter ego was actually one of the best things that happened to me academically is because in 8th grade, my highest GPA was a 2.3. My first GPA in high school was a 3.5, and I took all regular classes.
Yeah.
And it was because of that person who was, I'm going to study. I'm going
Yeah.
to go in and get extra help before school starts. I'm going to stay after class, and it might look like a brown noser. I might get clowned and made fun of, but I'm going to get my questions answered. And so I think I overall graduated with like a 3.4 something GPA. But to some people, they're like, wow, that's it. To me, that was everything, because when I
Yeah.
was in the 6th grade and I was 12 years old, my mom came crying home from a parent teacher conference, and my 6th grade teacher told my mom that I was going to be the leader of a gang shot, stabbed, and killed. And so that's why that's a huge point and pivotal moment for me, is because I was supposed to be dead by 16, not starting varsity football games as a sophomore. And so I lived past 16. I'm 38 years old now. And so,
Yeah.
sometimes people can come into our lives, and I'm sure he meant to shift me and change me for the positive. I think, so I'll give him his credit.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that it could have gone a completely opposite direction. I could have allowed him his, expectations or limitations to be my standard. And
Yeah.
so I say all of that because if it weren't for some of the best coaches that could have ever surrounded a person that was lost, discouraged, and uncertain, as well as that alter ego that I created that didn't exist but was always better and pushing me to become and be better, I don't think I'm talking to you from this point of view and perspective that I am today.
You bet. So there's a lot to unpack in what you just said, but I'll keep it to kind of two things. So one is, you mentioned early on with, the coach, hey, if you don't have enough hope for something, borrow some of mine. Someone listening is saying, I resonate with that, but I don't have that person in my life that I feel like believes in me enough that I can go borrow some. What would be a piece of advice to the person listening that says, man, that sounds really good, but I don't know where I'm going to turn to for that?
Okay, so if you don't have the example, find the proof.
Mm,
And if you don't have the example in your immediate family, you don't have the example in your community, in your neighborhood, find the proof that it exists. There's a phone, there's a tablet, there's a computer, there's this thing called YouTube. And there are tons of motivational speakers inspiring the world for free. So, what I encourage that person to do is that when you get online, you pretend as though they are speaking directly and only to you, and
mm,
you borrow their belief. Because if you don't have the example, that's not an excuse, but there is proof that there is positivity, there is that belief, there is the opportunity to get borrowed belief from the people who are out there preaching, ministering, sharing a word, whether it's 15 seconds on Instagram or whether it's 45 minutes on YouTube, everything in between. So what I do is when somebody actually gives me a positive word, I store it.
mm.
If it's like, you know what, you could do anything you want to do. I can, and then I store it. Or even when now with speaking, you know what, you're a great motivational speaker. You should try to speak on this platform, or you should try to speak at this conference. Especially when I was young in my
Yeah.
career, I would start to tell people, wow, because you believed in me, I'm going to believe in myself. And so
Yeah.
that's what I have to tell those people, is that there are several different, platforms and technology, that things that are talking to people, be one of those people that they're talking to.
I love it. Now, the second thing is just the motivation, right? So, you created somebody to compete with, and I would say it this way, that seems to be a bit healthier than, if you are constantly trying to outperform somebody else, where that can strain a relationship. It can cause bitterness and resentment towards somebody. But talk a little bit about, internal motivation, right? And you, yes, you had somebody in your ear saying, hey, I'm going to do the 11th, but it wasn't really somebody in your ear. It was you, kind of talking to yourself. So talk a little bit about finding that motivation from within to do the additional, unrequired type of work.
Yeah, Phil, when you say that, it reminds me of the slogan and statement that I make with all corporations, because people are afraid of competition. It can create resolve, disaster inside of an organization, inside of a team. But I say this is that competition is great, comparison is terrible. And
Mm,
so anytime you're trying to compare yourself to somebody left, right, you're always going to come up short, right?
yeah.
And so, with that being said, the healthy way is to create positive competition. Go if you're like, for example, if I were to train with Usain Bolt running 100 meters right now, let's say I run an 11,500 meters, which I'm probably not even that fast, and that's slow. But if I would train with Usain Bolt every single day, and I'm running against him, not just training and lifting with him, and he does a sprint, I do a sprint, but we're running side by side every single day because I'm comparing myself to him, I'm going to lose. I'm going to feel defeated and be discouraged. But
Yeah.
if at the end of our 3 weeks, 3 months training session, I now go get timed, I guarantee you without a shadow of a doubt, I'm going to run faster than that 11,500-meter
Yeah.
sprint. Why? Because I've been competing with somebody who's better than me. And so I wasn't comparing myself to him. Well, I don't run a 9,500 meters. No,
Yep.
no, no, no. I'm not comparing myself to Usain Bolt. I'm just competing with him because I
Yes.
want to get better. And when I want to get better, then I'm going to do everything in my power. And I'm going to put myself in the best environments, surround myself in those communities with people who are doing it, because competition breeds the best of us. Comparison makes us feel the worst.
I love that. Rewind that last 30 seconds and listen to that. That's really good. So as you've progressed in high school, once again, grades are coming up. You're great on the football field. I mean, you're an all high school player in the state of California, which is a huge deal. You make the decision to go to USC, but before you head off to USC, you have a graduation party like many folks do, and your dad comes back for it, and he asks you to walk him to his car, and there's an important gift that gets given. So talk a little bit about that moment for you in your story.
Wow, Phil, it's amazing. We oftentimes get discouraged because we don't get what we want, and we're blinded because we get what we need.
Mm,
And so when my dad came, so my dad and I, we were rebuilding our relationship through my high school years, and then it took off in college, which was phenomenal. But this day in particular, I'll never forget, because um, a lot of times we hear this term called church hurt. And it's when people go to church and they've been let down by God in their opinion, their perspective. The church has done and said some things that have completely shifted them off course.
yeah.
And I was talking to my dad the other day. I was like, man, I've never been church hurt because, Dad, you've taught me the Bible. And
Mm,
so on this day in particular, my dad and I are walking to the car after my high school graduation. And I'm thinking, like every other kid, right? This is the time when your parents going to give you a car. This is the time where your parents going to give you that envelope full of $1,000 and tell you, hey, go have fun, your senior trip type thing. And
right.
he goes to the back, and I mean, I'm starting to rub my hands closer and closer together, like, yeah, it's coming. Thank you. And he hands me this book. And it was this black book that I still have to this day, that on the front said Holy Bible. And he says, this is my Bible that my coach gave me when I was in boxing. He says, this book will give you more strength than I could ever give you.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, I walk back to my house still pissed and angry because I didn't get a car and money. And I'm like, this guy gave me a book. Like, are you
Yeah.
kidding me? Like, I just graduated high school. And Phil, 3 months later, I found myself, you know, deep into that book, because we would go to Bible study
Yeah.
at USC. And so when we were at Bible study in USC during training camp, a funny story is our team chaplain tells us, hey guys, we have Bible study Wednesday night after meeting. And anybody who's gone to training camp knows that this is an all day affair. You
Yeah.
start at 6 o'clock in the morning, you get back to your dorm at like 10 o'clock at night. So he says, Thomas, you coming to Bible study on Wednesday? Man, I'm not going to Bible study. I'm going to sleep.
Yeah.
He said, the words in this Bible will give you more rest and
Mm,
peace than any amount of sleep can. And it's very similar to my dad, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Boom. I go, all right, so I missed the first two or three and I'm exhausted. I'm still tired and I'm struggling. I'm
Yeah.
like, all right, if I'm still tired, I'm struggling, I can go to this Bible study. And I just started to dive into that word, into that Bible. But my dad gave it to me 5 months prior to actually needing it. And that's the
Yeah.
most amazing thing about God is that God prepares you before it's time.
I love it. Yes. So we're gonna come back to the faith life, but to start with, you're at USC and you're there in the heydays. I mean, you're coming in with a freshman class that, I mean, you it's probably your freshman class and down at the U with Miami Hurricanes classes that go on to have the most prolific NFL careers thereafter. But you got Reggie Bush, he's a roommate of yours, and so talk about coming into USC. And, I would imagine that you've got a pretty confident strut coming in. I mean, you've just had a really good career, but now once again, it's there's a little bit of a difference between an 18-year-old and 23-year-old man.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are peaks, there are plateaus, and then there are valleys. And I hit so many valleys, and it almost seemed as though my plateaus were my peaks.
Mm,
And you're absolutely right. You go from being one of the top ranked players in the country at 18 years old, you're not too humble. And sometimes life loves to serve you a piece of humble pie. And I got it as soon as I got to USC. I mean, guys were faster, they were in better shape, they were stronger. I didn't even know pretty much how to put on my uniform anymore. It was like so bad. It's like, where do I line up? Where do I stand? So what am I looking for? It's like you almost forget how to do it.
yeah.
And I'll never forget. I ran into an offensive lineman by the name of Kyle Williams. It was like our first full padded practice, and a play that I'd ran for years that had worked a specific way. Just lower your shoulder, run into him, he'll fall over. Didn't happen. And so this is why we need to understand the art of versatility. He said, "Hey, rookie, that's not going to work here. It might have worked in high school, but it's not going to work here." When we
Yeah.
watched film, my coach pointed it out and said, "This doesn't work at this level. You have to have multiple moves." And so
Yeah.
from there, I started to study other people, right? And so this is why they say good artists copy, great artists steal. And so for me, I was starting to watch my other teammates. You can learn a heck of a lot more from other people's rights and wrongs than you can do from learning from all of the mistakes that you could create and make your entire self, right? And
Mm,
so I started to learn what moves are working for other players. And then I started to steal those same things. Now, I wasn't having all of the success in the world, but I was learning how to study, learning how to
yeah.
prepare, and then also learning how to learn from other people. And so that first year I redshirted. And what redshirt means is that you don't play.
Yeah.
You practice, but you don't play. It's like going to work every single day, but you don't get paid.
Right.
And it was the hardest thing for me at 18 years old, because it's like you have all these people who are turning to the game on Saturday and they see your roommate, and your
Mm,
roommate's a top player in the country as a freshman. And
yeah.
so he's coming home, tired, bruised, banged up from, 100-yard rushing games, from two touchdowns, ESPN interviews, and you're just coming home from being sore at practice. And
Yeah.
so what I learned in that, same instance too, is that just because it's not happening to you doesn't mean you have to be jealous. You can be happy and thankful for the people who are closest and around you,
Yeah.
because it might not be your turn, but they're going to expose you to so much more than you would have seen had you
Mm,
been salty, upset, angry. And so, Reggie showed me, I watched the best of the best. I mean, this is a guy who didn't touch a sip of alcohol from the time he was born till the time he was, all the way through college. And so he was going to parties and like not drinking. So I saw, like, I'm like, wait a minute. I'm going to parties. I don't know if this college experience, how long it's going to last. I'm going to enjoy myself.
yeah.
Reggie was like, no, I got a vision. I got a dream. And Phil, the story I love. I don't know how many times or even if I've shared this at all, but the story is that Reggie's one of the most committed human beings I've ever met before. So our first night in the dorms, parents move us in. The next day we got first day of training camp. We're studying our playbook. I'm looking at a completely different language. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I gotta put this down. So then we start talking. I don't know how we got on this subject, but I asked him, I said, would you ever leave college early, go to the
Yeah.
league?
Yeah.
He goes, no, I plan to get my degree. I plan to do this, 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 and this. He said, but the only way I will leave is if I win the Heisman.
Mm.
Well, we fast forward 3 years later, he wins the Heisman, his number 2 pick overall in the NFL draft, and the rest of that is history, right?
Right.
But he knew at the very beginning, I'm here for a purpose.
Mm.
I have a vision that's much greater than any single circumstances that I either have been in or that I'm in currently, because my vision is where I'm going. And I
Yeah.
learned that, right? And so
Yeah.
Reggie wouldn't, party or drink during the week in school, where, some of the other guys would take advantage of, what college life was about. And so Reggie would go out there and just absolutely destroy opponents. But he was pure, he was focused. And there's no doubt of why he had the amount of success in college. And like, I was there to see it firsthand. Like, he
Yeah.
is the product of his results.
Yeah. Well, so something I want to highlight that you mentioned in there, and it ties into what you were talking about earlier with, the difference between, competition and comparison was you come in and you have to have a certain amount of confidence to play at that level of football. At the same token, you have to have a certain amount of humility to stay at that level of football, right?
Yeah.
And so you just mentioned, well, I came in and I had to be learning because what had got me here wasn't going to get me there, right? And so as you talk about that, somebody listening right now, they might feel like, hey, in my career, I've kind of plateaued, right? I've been doing this for 10 years and, I've gotten to a certain level of success and it just seems like I'm stuck. And my guess is there's probably a level of, hey, if you'd be willing to be humble, ask for help or make an adjustment, you might see that next peak. So talk a little bit about, having a certain level of success, but then taking humility to get to the next level of it.
Yeah. So I didn't get it. A change in perspective allows us to elevate in power.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is, I only had one perspective coming into college. I only had one perspective because I played one position. So it was very easy for me to plateau. It was
Yeah.
very easy for me to hear. Here's what took my perspective and my game to another level. When my coach asked me to play multiple positions at
Yeah.
once,
Yeah.
because you can lull yourself to sleep, you can get redundant, you can get bored, you can fall in a mess with the mundane, because it's like, I already know what I'm doing, I know what to expect. So for me, playing multiple positions actually opened up my brain and my mind to a whole new perspective of the game of football. So coming back to your question about the person who's been in a career for 10 years, here's what I would say. Fall in love learning about something new and something else.
Mm.
I had to fall in love with learning about something new and something else, playing a different position, whether that was the left side, the middle, or the right. What that did is that I could never get lulled to sleep. And the same thing I encourage people to do nowadays. One of the things that I just learned, or I just got, we were talking about, was a barbecue. So
Yeah.
what, I'm terrible at cooking. I'm terrible at barbecuing, but I'm starting to open up my mind, and so I can explore and I can learn in all of these other ways, because that's going to create the habits of opening up my mind into what I normally do for work, what I do on a day to day. It's going to get me to turn over some stones. And I learned that specifically, Phil, from my mom
Mm.
in 2018. So I surprised my mom, took my mom to South Africa for her 55th birthday. And she asked first and foremost, she asked some of the dumbest questions. I'll be honest with you. But my mom's curiosity,
Yeah.
I was so enthralled with her curiosity, because my mind wouldn't even think to go there. Why?
Mm.
Because I'd gone there twice before. I'd been there. So I'm like just going through the motions. All right, I'll be here with my mom. But then she starts asking questions about the apartheid. She starts asking questions about the landowners.
Yeah.
the produce. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I learned more from her perspective than I did from mine. And again,
Yeah.
if we can change and shift perspectives and apply ourselves to something else, learn, develop, and grow, then that will carry over into our day in and day out. So for
Yeah.
me, learning new positions in college gave me a completely different perspective. And that's what allowed me to have the humility to ask the questions, because I don't know how to play these positions. And humility is a muscle. You stop
Yeah.
using it, you lose it. You
Mm.
keep using it, you gain more of it.
I absolutely love it. So to talk to that, sophomore year, you're doing special teams and linebacker, but then junior year rolls around and they say, hey, why don't you flip to the other side of the ball and do a little fullback for us? Once again, I think, and in high school, you did play both sides of the ball, but I think there's an element of somebody that could say, man, I don't know if you know this or not, but you brought me in as a 5-star recruit for to play linebacker. I don't know that you should move me over there, but you were willing to do it and step into the role. And, talk a little bit about one, just being willing to say yes to something because you'd rather have an opportunity to play than to say, no, I'm a linebacker. And if you're not going to play me at that, then I don't want to play.
Yeah. Here's another good leadership moment. Leaders know their team so well, they'll use the incentive and motivation of their team
Mm,
to get them to move.
mm,
So Ken Norton Jr. knew I wanted to play in the NFL.
yeah.
I'm not here for school, I'm here for ball.
Yeah.
So what he told me one day is, Thomas, you're not getting too much reps at linebacker. What we brought you in here to do. Why don't you flip over to the other side of a ball? Because fullback, there's not too many good fullbacks that are in the NFL. You might have a chance to get there. Now, I played probably 6, 7 games at fullback, started 4 of them. And the cool thing about it, Phil, is that when I know you're going to get there, but I really want people to understand is that when I got drafted, the NFL paid me for 1 position, but they got me for 4.
Mm,
The more you can do.
yep.
They say the more you can do, the longer you'll stick around.
Yeah.
And so what Norton taught me in that moment, what I learned from him in leadership is know your team so well that you can incentivize them so that you can see the best thing for them when they don't even see it.
Yeah.
And here's a guy who played 13 years in the NFL. I think he knows a thing or two about the next level.
Yeah.
And then two, from my side, from the person who's climbing that ladder, the person who wants to grow into that elite level, the more you can do, the longer you'll stick around. I don't think I would have went to the NFL if I would have just been a linebacker. I think the
Yeah.
reason why I went to the NFL is because I was a linebacker that played multiple positions. I played special teams with the tenacity and enthusiasm that nobody comes with. And then I was able to partially kind of dip my toe on the opposite side of the ball. So they were like diversity. This
Yeah.
dude's diverse. We'll pay him 1 salary, but he can do a couple of different things.
Yeah. I love that. Well, and so to that, your teammates see this in you, and your teammates have a bunch of respect, and you end up being a team captain, which, I played basketball in college. And so, I can understand like that's probably one of the biggest honors you can get. And I don't know how USC goes about, naming a team captain, but oftentimes there's a few important people that, really respect somebody and what they've been able to do to get that title. So talk about what that meant for you. And just once again, I mean, the long road to get there.
Yeah. Um, the best thing you can ever give somebody on your team is respect. The best thing you can ever receive from your team is respect.
Yeah.
We in college, we learned very early. It's not about the beat writers. It's not about the people who were going to write about articles or talk about you on ESPN, because they're just doing their job. The most important thing, and the thing that we all chased, and we learned this, is when you walk into a room or you see another player or your teammate in class on campus and they give you that head nod, like, I respect you. I
Yeah.
respect what you bring to the table. I respect what you say. I respect what you, that was the pinnacle, because there's a lot of people who got accolades but didn't get the respect.
Mm.
And everybody knows that that player isn't worth is worth less than their value.
Yeah.
And so for me getting that, and Phil, one of the best things that I could have ever done at that time, and it still lives with me till this day, is that, going back to the humility piece, we think if we're not in the spotlight, we're not shining bright.
Mm.
I started 10 games in 4 years on the field.
Yeah.
I started 36 of the games I ever played in at USC. Now, what's the difference? Okay. The difference is my second year at USC, they gave me the nickname the Hitman.
Yeah.
And when they gave me that nickname, they almost commanded and demanded this figure to come out of me.
Yeah.
And they wanted me to start him up before the game. And they would say, T Will, get us going. So even though I wasn't starting on the field, we didn't leave the locker room until I started the game.
Yeah.
And so again, that was another paradigm and perspective shift from Ken Norton, because he said, Tom, I'm like, Coach, I'm not starting. He goes, what do you mean? He goes, every single game in locker room we go into, you start. He's
Yeah.
like, and even on top of that, you're on kickoff or you're on
Mm.
kickoff return. That means you're on the field the very first play. And so that gave me, even though the worldly standards and my ego wanted to have more of responsibility, my commitment and responsibility to the team was so much greater, because it wasn't about me shining on the field. It was about me
Mm.
shining brightest before we hit the field. And
Yes.
so when that perspective came, I was like, it's my duty, it's my responsibility to get the people ready. We have a saying on the Jon Gordon team, is that sometimes you're the star of the team, sometimes your job is to support the star of the team, but the team is always the star.
That's
It's
good.
what's most important that's demanded from me. So I've carried that same mindset over into now of, when we're at a speaking event and I'm not the main speaker, if I'm with John, hey, I'm asking Jon Gordon, what do you need? John, you want something to
Yeah.
drink? You need some water? Like, what do we need to do? Do I need to be in the back on the side taking pictures so that you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
it's not me sitting in the corner moping around because I'm not the shining. No, 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 no. I'm part of this. The better I can serve him, the better he can do, the better
Yeah.
our team can do. And the same thing with our other facilitators and trainers. Like, do you need a cup of water? Do you need me to, help with the sign-in sheet? It's, again, coming back to the more you can do.
I love
And
it.
so it's not about me in those moments. It's about what can I do from my position to get us the best ready and prepared.
I love that. Now, there's a lot of amazing games at USC that you were a part of. Which one, either from a personal, standpoint or from an atmosphere standpoint, sticks out the most for you?
I think I go back to the Texas game.
Yeah.
I didn't play in it, so our team lost, but I didn't, so I didn't really contribute that game. No, that energy, when people say you can feel the electricity, that game was probably the time where we had played at the Rose Bowl in Los Angeles against UCLA several times.
Yeah.
We had also played there for postseason and bowl games 2 years prior, but you could feel it. It was something in the atmosphere of, there was a strength of wills, and you
Yeah.
felt it. Like, you felt it. But I think for me personally, like, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like, I cannot believe, like, took me back to a child, was the first time we played at Notre Dame. And so, Phil,
Mm.
we leave Los Angeles on a Thursday. You normally leave on a Friday, but we left on a Thursday because of time change and all these other things. So you practice Thursday morning, miss class, jump on a plane, get to the hotel in South Bend, Indiana. And now we're a couple hours from leaving the hotel, walking into the stadium. And the night before the game, I'm laying in my hotel room, roommate in the room. We pop on the TV and it's Rudy.
Yes,
You're like,
sir.
no way. No way. We're watching Rudy getting ready to run into it. And so I'm like doing push-ups. I'm ready to play. Like Rudy, I was like 9 years old when Rudy came out.
Yeah.
And so you walk out to the stadium and you walk down. There's this part where Rudy like is running up the stadium tunnel. That's like pivotal. And there's touchdown Jesus in the background. And you walk out the stadium and you hear the clicking and the clacking of the cleats and you look back and there's touchdown Jesus and you're like, whoa, like
Yeah.
this is why everybody deserves and should experience an ultimate dream or goal once,
Yeah.
because you're like, I'm here. It's
Yeah.
the moment that, because so many times we're not allowed to be present in the moment because we're trying to advance, evolve, grow, maximize. But that was a moment that I couldn't, even if I tried to stop being present.
I
Like,
love it.
took you back to the first time you saw the movie and you're like, I'm doing it here. And then you almost can hear and sense the football gods and legends that have blessed that field decades.
I love it, man. I love it. So after an amazing career, in at USC, and I mean, you guys had just amazing records and a lot of team success, and because of your versatility, you end up getting drafted 155th to the Jaguars. So talk about, it's kind of like freshman year all over again, only
Only
stakes
you
are
get paid.
probably, yeah, stakes are a bit higher and there's some money coming through the door. So
Yeah,
talk a little bit about that.
it the coolest moment was hearing your name called. Like, I rewind back to the sixth grade moment with my mom and what my teacher told her, and she was crying in that moment. And I made a promise to myself in that moment, like, Mom, I'm going to hug you in the same moment. It's going to be tears of joy as opposed
Mm,
to tears of pain. We
mm,
did it in high school graduation. We did it in college graduation, but this time was even better. Like,
yeah.
we did it. And so a couple of weeks later, we fly to Jacksonville. And so as soon as we get to Jacksonville, somebody says, welcome to South Georgia. Because in my mind, when I got drafted to Jacksonville, I thought Miami. I was like,
Yeah,
oh, this is
right.
going to be amazing. I'm young, I'm single, like it's going to be phenomenal. And it
Yeah.
was definitely South Georgia. And we get to the stadium and I'm like, this is it. This is it. This is the feeling that I like. This was like the feeling that I've been looking for, like for the past 17 years, chasing professional athletics in pro sports. This is it. I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it. We walked through the doors and it was not the heaven bells ringing. There was no band. There was
Yeah.
no cheerleaders. There was nobody there. It was empty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was a little bit disappointed.
Yeah.
I was like, this is it. No, 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 this isn't it.
Yeah.
And what I felt like in that moment, Phil, in all honesty, was the climb was so much better than the view.
Mm.
The climb to get to the mountaintop, because I was at the pinnacle. Like, I had
Right.
7 years old, I want to play professional sports. 23 years old, I'm walking through a professional sport locker room.
Yeah.
I made it. I'm there.
Yeah.
And I realized that it was that journey, but it was also the process in becoming. I'd
Mm.
overcome so much by the time I was 23 years old athletically
Yeah.
that it gave me the callous to overcome adversity, to
Yeah.
almost look it in the face and saying, I need adversity in order to drive. And so
Mm.
that's the same principles in the book. So the first principle in the book, Dig, is, it's either preventing you or pushing you. And
Mm.
so many instances, there were things and different events that took place in my life just from college alone that were preventing me. But
Yeah.
quickly I understood that those are the events that actually push you. Those are the events that push you through and allow you to get, going to onto the place that you want to ultimately go.
That's so good. Now, as you say that, I hear, I kind of start thinking about people that talk about, I almost like put obstacles in my way because I need that sense of pressure. I need that sense of this to be able to move forward. How does one overcome that? So they're not making it harder for themselves just to have the motivation to do something. They can say, no, I just see where I want to go. And now that I've overcome one obstacle, let's maybe not intentionally put the next obstacle in our way.
You're talking about self-sabotage. Trust me,
Yeah.
you do not have to help life with adversity. It is full of adversity as it is.
Yeah.
It's just understanding when adversity strikes and when adversity hits, because adversity doesn't always hit us
Yeah.
personally. It
Hmm.
might hit a close loved one, a close family member. It might hit somebody who you're close with at work. So adversity comes. And so what we have to do now at 38 years old, what I've learned through years and years of therapy, self-awareness work, personal development, all of these things, is that enjoy the highs when they're high,
Yeah.
enjoy the lows when they're low.
Mm.
Don't expect for it to be low when it's high. Don't expect when it's high for be low. Coach would always say, play pass when it's time to play pass. Play
Yep.
run when it's time to play run. Don't be on the field playing run when it's pass. Don't be on the
Yep.
field playing pass when it's run. And
Mm.
so what I highly recommend and I teach people is to use what adversity are there to propel and project them.
Yeah.
Don't create adversity. Don't
Yeah.
try to create separation. Like a lot of people try to create separation at home so that they can be more motivated at work. And it's like, well, if you're more motivated at work and then home's starting to fizzle out and mess up, eventually home's going to dissolve. And then that's going to carry over and play into your work. Right. So
Yes.
one of those things in that moment, it was, man, I had so much fun trying to get here that now that I've gotten here, it's not as much fun.
Yeah.
So it again, I think for me, man, when I've really taken a step back, I'm addicted to achievement.
Mm.
I'm addicted to it. I'm addicted to climbing it. In a couple of days, I'm going to Peru to hike Machu Picchu by myself.
How
Right.
cool.
I love getting on a plane, going to a place I've never been that I don't know. I've done it half a dozen times. And I'm addicted to it. Like
Yeah.
I just love accomplishing things, but I'm also understanding that it's not just when I get there, it's the preparation, it's the process, it's all a part of it because you spend more time preparing than you do performing.
Yeah.
Most of the time, we don't think that. We think
Yeah.
that once we're just performing, but you spend more time preparing than you do performing. So enjoy the process,
Mm.
enjoy preparing because that's the longer period of time. It took me 15 years to get to the NFL, and I only
Yep.
spent 5 there. So I didn't enjoy enough of it. And so now, you know, after football, I'm understanding that you have to enjoy the crappy parts of the process and preparation too.
Absolutely. So while you're playing football, you start with Jacksonville and then there's a few different stints with other teams, but ultimately it comes down to I think every person would like to leave on their own terms, and sometimes that just doesn't happen. And so you have a significant injury in your professional days that ends up leading to kind of the end of the NFL run. So talk about that. To your point, I spent my whole life preparing for this opportunity, and then something really outside of my control ends up taking that away.
Got to go back to what we talked about a couple of minutes ago. Sometimes in life, we don't get what we want, but we get what we need.
Mm.
I was one of the last of my friends to go to the NFL, but I was the first of them to leave.
Mm.
I go to church 3 days after I left the NFL for good. I retired yep, it happened on Thursday at practice. Friday, I get on a plane. I go to church on Sunday. I walk through the church doors and I hear, your chains are gone and now you're free.
Mm.
I sit in the pews, listen to the pastor. I couldn't tell you what the pastor talked about, but what I can tell you is that God specifically spoke to me and said, you thought football was your purpose, but it was just your passion to lead you to your purpose.
Mm.
I started speaking to athletes about the transition.
Yeah.
How can I speak to athletes about the transition? Because I was an athlete in transition.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do is play the 15 years, buy my mom a house, be set for life. But what my purpose is to go there, represent the 1%, but still identify as the 99 that don't play professional sports.
Mm.
So now I can speak to athletes about transitioning into sports and out of sports.
Yeah.
And you don't have a story, you don't have something that people can gravitate towards until you go through a hardship as hard as the transition. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you're transitioning a high school student transitioning going to college. It doesn't matter if you're an athlete transitioning out of sports. It doesn't matter if you're transitioning from, parents with multiple kids to empty nesters to a person who has just walked out of their job for the last day because they're 65 years old. Now they're in retirement.
Yeah.
Transition is inevitable. And
Yes.
because I went through it at such a young age, I can now speak to it, teach to it, and give valuable information, not because of something I read, but because of something I've experienced. And so the biggest message from there is that just because you didn't get what you want doesn't mean you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And
Yeah.
that was a hard, tough pill to swallow, because when your vision and God's assignment don't align, that sucks.
Mm, that is good. Now, on the purpose versus passion part, I
Mm-hmm.
think that is a really important understanding. But I also think it can be a really hard thing to think this was my purpose and my passion, but maybe it was just a passion and there's a bigger purpose, right? I mean, I'm sure, especially for you working with, significantly on the athletes or strong business owners, it's like those two things and your identity get wrapped up in that.
Yep.
And all of a sudden that's not there anymore. And it's like, well, what is my identity
Yep.
uh, after my
Yep.
passion goes away?
Yep. So here's how I articulate and explain that. Let's say for me, and from the time I was 14 to the time I was 27, I was a football player. From the time I was born to the time I die, I'm Thomas Williams.
Mm,
Being Thomas Williams is purpose.
yeah.
Being the football player is a passion.
Yeah.
So there are stints of our lives where we experience passions,
Yep.
but for the longevity and over the course of our life, we will be who we are. The person that
Mm,
we are has purpose, but the activities and hobbies and things that we do are part of our passion. It can
mm,
feel like a purpose, but see, passions run out. I was an
yeah.
avid golfer. You could have caught me playing golf. At one time, I played 36 holes. Let's go play 36 holes. You can't catch me going to swing golf club for 5 golf balls right now. I haven't played golf since the summer of 2019.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean my purpose died. It means my passion was gone, but my purpose
Mm,
continues to live. And so
yeah.
that's what we need to understand when we think that one thing leaves us. It's like, no, that was purposeful in that season of life, but it was just a passion of
Yeah.
ours. The purpose, just like us, we last for as long as we've been alive.
Mm,
But that passion, that's just a little bit of who we are. And so when we can navigate the difference between who we are and what we do, we'll have a lot easier of a time adjusting and becoming flexible and pivoting when the time comes for it to happen, because it's all inevitable. This is just a speck of dust. And so I think the pandemic obviously showed us that,
yeah.
of like, hey, just because you can't do what you've always done, it doesn't mean you get to stop living. You have to
Yeah.
keep living, right? So
Yeah.
now you find a new passion inside of the purpose, which is the course and the extent of your life.
I love that. That's so good. Now, you mentioned, hey, you start doing some speaking and eventually, and you referenced this today, there's a kind of a partnership or a collaboration that you joined the Jon Gordon team. So talk a little bit about how you two got connected and how this, partnership came to be.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had been speaking for 6 years on a very lower level. And it's almost like when they say the student is ready, the teacher appears. Like
Yeah.
I was ready. And I talk about it in Dig, right? In the moments that you're getting ready to quit, get excited, because
Mm,
miracles happens in those moments.
mm,
And so it was December 28th, 2017. I was sitting down having breakfast with a really good friend of mine named Yogi Roth. And Yogi said, hey, what do you want to focus on for the year 2018? I said, I need a coach. I had great coaches in high school that got me to college. I had great coaches in college that got me to the NFL. I played for great coaches. I need to be surrounded by coaches so they can make me better. He's like, have you ever met Jon Gordon? Nope. Puts together, fires just this quick text message, group text. Hey, John, meet Thomas. Thomas, meet John. And I'd read The Energy Bus,
yeah.
2010. And so John responded 30 minutes later. Hey, I'll be in LA, January 1st. Let's get together. So John and I are walking, 5 minutes goes by, and he goes, how's your whole heart? How's your soul? Like, what do you talk to me? Basically, like, why are we talking right now? Is
Yeah.
why I took it. And I was like, oh, I'm going to ask you the question. I don't know if I'm ever going to see you again. I'm going to say, hey, John, what do you do when you get tired and burnt
Mm,
out He goes, well, it's the first day of the year. You're not supposed to be burnt out and tired yet. And he says, you know what, Thomas? It sounds like you're focused on the fruit of speaking, not the root. See, when people
Mm,
focus on the fruit, they neglect the root and the tree dies. He
mm,
said, get back to being passionate. He goes, did you always love playing football? I go, no. He goes, well, what kept you in it? I said, the love. And so he said, can you speak once a week? And Phil, at that time, I was speaking probably twice a month.
yeah.
And he said, I go, John, that sounds like a lot. He goes, well, I spoke 88 times last year. I was like, dang,
Yeah.
that's a lot.
Yeah.
So I spoke 44 times that year. Now they weren't all paid because John
Mhm.
is huge advocate of reps.
Yeah.
Speak as much as you can to as many groups as you can until you find your niche, you find your groove. And I found my groove that year. And so from 2018 till now, John has been a huge reason for my success, because going back to what I said before, sometimes you have to be humble enough to ask the questions that might make you feel inferior or
Yeah.
insecure. I didn't do that. I used to have a huge barrier between me and men because of the absence of my father.
Mm,
So I didn't want to seem weak or less than to another man by asking him a remedial question.
yeah.
John shifted that for me. He built my trust. He built great relationship with me, constantly checked in on me. So for me, every time I get a chance to talk to John, and I've been saying this for a while now, it's like I feel like I'm Daniel's son and he's Mr. Miyagi. Like John, again, that borrowed belief.
Yeah.
Here's a guy who's known for being Mr. Positivity, gives you a 30 seconds of positivity. I'm going to take that for the next 30 days.
Yeah.
And so it's been phenomenal, because not only do I feel like I've increased my ability to speak, my impact, but I found my team again.
Mm,
There's a team of us that are on group chats. And I don't miss going into the locker room, talking ball with my buddies, because I got my team. And
yeah.
again, that wasn't my purpose. So I don't have to live in that. That was a passion. This is a new passion of mine that
Mm,
feels purposeful.
mm.
And now I'm able to go full-fledged, full throttle all the time.
I love it. That's so good. Now, because you've had, amazing life, we'll just say experiences, and can speak into so many different topics. You've done the speaking, you also have the book side. So talk a little bit about books. You've referenced them a couple times in the newest one.
Yeah. So in 2014, I wrote Permission to Dream. After that, I wrote The Relentless Pursuit of Greatness. And then most recently, I wrote Dig, which is
Yeah.
discovering your depth, determination through life's adversity.
Mm,
And so for us, Dig just stands for diving into your greatness. And so for everybody who's at a point in their life where they feel like there is more, there can be more, they got to dig. And so
yeah.
there's 4 principles in Dig. And the first principle that I talked about before was you have to find out if what you're after, if you're being prevented from doing it or if you're being pushed towards it.
Mm,
The second lesson in it is, if you can't find the example, find the proof, like
mm,
I was talking about before.
yeah.
And really where that comes from is um, before 1954, the spring of 1954, everybody thought the 4-minute mile was literally impossible, physically, humanly impossible. But then Roger Bannister comes along, breaks it in the spring of 54. And in that same year, there was about 50 other people who also ran a mile under 4
Yeah.
minutes. And so because they didn't have the example, they didn't think they could do it. But because once they found the proof, then they actually believed that they could do it.
Mm,
And so the question is that what they got stronger in that, 6 months in
yeah.
1954, they could run faster? No, they just had the proof that it could be done. And so you move on to the third one, and we talked about it, which is, in the quitting moments, the miracles happen. So get excited. Don't quit. Don't give up. Get excited. Almost look for the miracle, because it's coming and it's right around the corner. And the fourth principle is, finally, you got to run towards the roar. You got to
Mm,
just run towards the roar. And running towards the roar comes from an African proverb where there would be animals like hyenas, and they would be at the water hole. They would be getting drinks, drinking water. They would bathing. And so what would happen is the lions who had to eat, they would put the loudest roaring lion on one side of the hyenas. But this lion didn't have anything to offer, didn't have an asset other than its loud roar. It was old, it was unathletic, and it's just one.
Yeah.
And so when it would roar, it would freak the crap out of the hyenas and everything else that was eating or drinking at the water hole. And they would run completely in the opposite direction. And what would happen is that the lions, before they put the loudest roaring lion on one side, they put the fastest, most athletic lioness, hungry, ferocious lioness on one side. And where these hyenas would run to is right into the mouth of the fast, hungry, athletic lionesses. And so what the lesson is that when you run towards the roar, it's ultimately where you're supposed to end up going, and it will save you. Might not always save you from physical death, but what it will save you from is the regret. And sometimes people who live in regret for so long actually feel like they died the day that they made that mistake.
Yeah. Man, you have a lot of wisdom, my guy. I appreciate this.
Yeah, man.
Well,
Appreciate you, brother.
Well, Thomas, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got things to get to, but I just want to say thanks so much for, sharing all the pivotal moments that have led to where you're at. And the beauty is, we're just in a new passion right now. Who knows what this is going to lead to? And I can't wait to just continue to watch your journey and all the people that you're going to continue to help and all the people that you have helped. And you just got to promise me, 2-3 years from now, we're going to do this again. Next book will be out.
Next book, we'll do it, man.
You'll be doing 100 speaking engagements a year. Whatever it is, and
Yeah.
And we'll debrief again.
Yeah, Phil, I appreciate it, man. It's been an honor. I really appreciate the questions, and I appreciate the research that you did, my brother. Keep inspiring the world.